South Africa gets its first gender-balanced cabinet in history as President Cyril Ramaphosa unveils his ministers. The World Health Organization says insecurity in the Democratic Republic of Congo is making the Ebola response so challenging and unpredictable. Plus, one of Egypt's most wanted jihadists arrives back in the country after being handed over by the Libyan military strongman Khalifa Haftar. Hello and a warm welcome to the program. I'm Teniola Shobowale. We begin today in South Africa, where President Cyril Ramaphosa has announced a new cabinet in which, for the first time in the country's history, half of all ministers are women. In another unexpected move, one of the women is from the opposition. He appointed veteran opposition politician Patricia de Lille, who had stood for the Good Party as Minister of Infrastructure Development. Mr. Ramaphosa also reduced the number of ministers in what he called a bloated cabinet from 36 to 28 ministers.
All South Africans are acutely aware of the great economic difficulties that our country is going through right now. But they are also aware of the constraints that have been placed on our public finances. It is therefore imperative that in all areas and spheres of government, we place priority on revitalizing our economy, while at the same time exercising great care in the use of public funds. And where implementation is unsatisfactory, action will be taken. I've decided, therefore, to make the following appointments to the National Executive. The Deputy President is David Mabuza. Minister of Finance is Tito Mboweni. Deputy Minister of Finance is Dr. David Masondo. Minister of Public Enterprises is Pravin Gordon. Deputy Minister is Pumulo Maswale.
Let's get more on this story from our South Africa Bureau Chief, Betty Dibia. Betty, it's good to see you. So how are South Africans reacting to the large inclusion of women in President Ramaphosa's new cabinet?
Well, a lot of people have applauded that, not just the inclusion of more women, but also the inclusion of younger people. For example, the new Justice Minister is about 34 years old. That's Ronald Lamola. But not everybody likes everything about the president's new cabinet. The size of the cabinet has reduced, but some of the opposition parties, that's expected, of course, have complained about the inclusion of more deputy ministers in some ministries. So you have people praising him for reducing the ministries or the departments from 36 to 28, reducing the number of ministers, of course, and then a few, like the International Relations Department or Trade, they have 2 deputy ministers. But generally, people are happy and are hopeful that some of the wastage, in public office will be reduced.
Betty, you mentioned the president reducing the numbers of ministers from 36 to 28. Is this one of the ways in which he plans to tackle corruption?
Well, if you recall last year when he was made the president in February last year, he promised the reduction of the size of government, reduction in the size. They believe that some of the ministries should be merged. He said it at the time, and he managed to do that, like higher education and science and technology. So he promised to reduce that, believing that that will reduce the cost of government and probably have extra money to channel to develop in the country in some other ways. So probably that could be it. And the issue of tackling corruption, there's so many other ways. For example, the new ministers and deputy ministers are to sign a performance agreement where their performance will be evaluated, assessed regularly, vis-a-vis the expectations from them by the president who has put him in place. So there are so many other measures, checks and balances along the way where he hopes, to get more trust of the people that he'll actually deliver the new dawn that he's promised them.
Well, the president has spoken so much about tackling corruption, but how are people reacting to the fact that he retained David Mabuza as his deputy minister?
Views are divided. I can tell you that Mr. David Mabuza and those who support him are very relieved. But remember, some of the things leveled against him are allegations. He's not been convicted, like so many other people who are also in cabinet, incidentally, or who are serving government in different other ways. So maybe along the line that will happen. You have the EFF, for example, up in arms that the president shouldn't have appointed or retained or reappointed Mr. Pravin Gordhan in Department of Public Enterprises, because recently the public protector released a report indicting him or accusing him of some impropriety. So the reception, it depends on where you stand, but as I said earlier, it's all allegations against him, and he's definitely relieved after taking that oath of office. The event is still going on, but he was the first in line to take his oath of office. But we're watching to see what will happen, if indeed he will be taken to court for any of these charges or these allegations leveled against him. But for now, he is the deputy president, reappointed by President Cyril Ramaphosa today.
All right, Betty, just before I let you go, the president also appointed opposition politician Patricia de Lille as Minister of Infrastructure Development. What could have influenced this decision?
Well, only the president can tell you that, but probably her antecedents as the immediate past mayor of the mother city, Cape Town. And she's a veteran, as you referred to her earlier, in politics, in national development, anti-apartheid struggle as well. And then she's a woman, and he's known to be a moderate person. He's promised inclusion in this government. So probably that's part of his own way. Remember, some of the members of the cabinet are also members of the Tripartite Alliance, not necessarily the ANC. That's the trade leaders, trade union, COSATU, the former president, is also a member of that cabinet. And you have the South African Communist Party as well. That's Dr. Blaine Nzimande and Chula Singlesi as well, serving in other capacities. So bringing in Ms. Patricia de Lille, it will appeal to women, it will appeal to what they call the colored community. And she's not a greenhorn. She's experienced in public administration. So hopefully the department where she's in is quite vital, public works and infrastructure. Let's see what she's going to do. But the president promised inclusion of everyone into his government. Maybe that's his own way of demonstrating that.
All right, then, Betty, I'll let you go now. Thank you so much for speaking to us on Network Africa. To other stories now, a senior World Health Organization official says insecurity is making the Ebola response in the Democratic Republic of Congo so challenging and unpredictable. While speaking to reporters in Geneva, the WHO's Regional Director for Africa, Matshidiso Moeti, added that this Ebola response is one of the most complex health emergencies the world has faced.
At the beginning of this year, there have been 174 healthcare-related attacks, either on healthcare facilities of one type or another, or on healthcare workers, or on volunteers, and some of them have involved, of course, patients having to flee healthcare facilities for safety. Indeed, when we compare the 5-month period of January 2019 until now, with a 5-month period from August to December last year, we see that security incidents have increased threefold in the last 5 months. So insecurity really is what is making the response to this Ebola outbreak so challenging and also so unpredictable.
We've increased vaccination and regained our catch-up on vaccination rings by using innovative pop-up methods which allow people to come from their homes for vaccination in pop-up vaccination centres. We've managed to curb nosocomial transmission or transmission in hospitals. It was a huge objective of ours is to get to zero transmission in the health system. Only 6-7 weeks ago, up to 35% of cases were being being transmitted in a nosocomial environment. That dropped over the last number of weeks to 16% as a proportion of all cases, and last week to a new low of 5%.
Now, one of Egypt's most wanted jihadists has arrived back in the country after being handed over by the Libyan military strongman Khalifa Haftar. Isham al-Hashmawi, a former Egyptian Special Forces officer, was detained in Libya late last year. He's wanted in connection with several attacks. These include a deadly ambush of police in Egypt's western desert 2 years ago and a raid on guards along the border with Libya in 2014. Egyptian courts had sentenced him in his absence to death. Let's get more on this story from the VOA's Edward Yeranian. Thank you so much for joining us on the program, Ed. How are Egyptians reacting to the return of al-Hashmawi back into the country?
Well, for the most part, Tenny, I think that public opinion is fairly pleased by the development. Certainly, if you look at the posts on Twitter, there does seem to be a rather overwhelming sentiment of pleasure that he was handed over by the Libyan authorities or Eastern Libyan military to the Egyptian army. There were a lot of people that were killed in terrorist operations, some of which he was accused of having a hand in. Of course, he'll be tried by a military tribunal to give an ultimate verdict as to whether he was part of those operations. He was tried in absentia, but he has a new trial now that he's been handed over. And I'd say globally, from the people I've spoken with in person, most people seem to be pleased.
Okay, we know that he was transferred to the country following a visit by Egypt's intelligence chief, Libya's General Haftar. What more can you tell us about that process?
Well, General Haftar visits Egypt regularly, so I'm not sure it's the visit of the intelligence chief to Benghazi that really caused his handover. I think perhaps he visited Libya in order to pick him up himself. He must certainly be involved in a lot of the operations between the two countries involving terrorism. Certainly the Egyptian military and the Libyan Eastern military and Libyan military forces cooperate closely. Egypt has a very long border with Libya. And a lot of terrorism coming into Egypt comes through Libya. At least that's what we've heard from the media. That's what we've heard from the Egyptian military, and intrinsically that seems to be what's happening. If you look at many of the recent operations against Christians down in Upper Egypt, those terrorists seem to infiltrate from Libya, and some anecdotal evidence of militants in the Sinai going between the Sinai and Libya.
Ed, you mentioned earlier that al-Hashmawi would be given a new trial. Do we know when that would take place?
No, because he will be tried by a military tribunal as a former military special forces officer, and the military doesn't usually give out that sort of information. At least we haven't heard that it has in the past. Clearly, the president is very eager to have him tried because he's been accused of the operation which blew up the country's general prosecutor several years ago, and the president himself was very, very angry, reported to have been very angry about that, and he at that time vowed to punish those who were responsible. So clearly, I would suspect that this trial would happen fairly soon.
All right, then, Ed, thank you so much for speaking to us on Network Africa.
My pleasure, Tenny.
Still to come on the program. Hundreds of Ethiopians without correct paperwork are due to be sent home from Yemen. Please stay with us.